This is the Investor Connect podcast program. This is Hall T. Martin. I'm the host of the show, in which we interview angel investors, venture capital, private equity, family offices, and many other investor groups for startups and growth companies. I hope you enjoy this episode. Thank you for joining us. Well, hello, this is Hall Martin of Investor Connect. Today we're here with Jefre Outlaw of Sprout Tiny Homes. Jefre, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Great. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got into real estate investing in the first place?
Well, I grew up with a handyman father and got my degree in finance and with minors in a couple of real estate areas, and started flipping back in the early 80s, residential homes and some rentals and things like that. And so I've been doing those kinds of things for 33 years.
And so what do you invest in specifically these days?
Well, my time and my passion the last 3 years has been focused around what's been a bit of a phenomenon, and some people thought it was a fad, but it's certainly a movement, is the tiny home industry. And let me define that a little bit more, because there's a lot of confusion around what tiny homes are. And I'm going to give you my definition. It could be argued. Generally in the industry, we talk about tiny homes being 200 to 400 square feet and usually on wheels. What we see the industry moving towards is modular and prefab homes that are highly efficient, well-designed, and functional in the 600 to 1,200 square foot space to solve for some of these challenges we're seeing in the market in missing middle housing, workforce housing, and active adult community housing. This is a real challenge when you're dealing with the cost of real estate in the 20 largest metropolitan areas in the United States.
And so the tiny homes is a great new market there coming up. Can you tell us more about what's driving that growth in that sector?
Well, what we see is, I'll give you an example. So there's a project in South Austin is coming online this year that we were involved in helping with the planning. And as you know, depending on which statistic you look at, the median price of a home in Austin is plus or minus $300,000. Now, this particular developer is going to deliver a product that'll be between $80,000 and $160,000. Now, the size of this home will be about 500 square feet, but it'll be in a gated community with swimming pool, dog park, clubhouse, and they'll offer 15 and 30-year mortgages, Fannie Mae, and eventually FHA approved. But you won't own the land. You'll actually have a 99-year lease on the land. So when you look at, you'll have a leasehold estate. So when you look at the cost of what some people can afford, millennials, the mid-40 single professional, the baby boomer who's an empty nester, maybe a widow, divorcee, this gives them a product that will fit their budget.
So there's a lot of innovation going on in this space, and one you hear about is the ability today that we now have the ability to 3D print a tiny home, and it can be done within 1 or 2 days, and it greatly reduces the cost of building a home itself. But it also sounds like the mechanism here of the 99-year lease, not having to own the land, mineral rights, and all that goes with it, is another innovation. What's your take on that?
Well, yes. In fact, here's the concern. And being a finance guy, I always love to argue numbers. So, 3D printed houses are great. And I'm very familiar with the project here in Austin. I met that team in the Affordable Housing Accelerator here in Austin last year. You can drive the cost of construction down only so far. At some point, the rising land cost and having to amortize the cost of the land becomes self-defeating. So we're looking for a combination of things. Prefab components built in a factory where there's very little waste, the highly energy efficient. Some of it can be roboticized to bring the cost down, getting costs down to as low as $88 a square foot for construction. And that will be a real market changer, even for the tract home builders. The industry, well, what we're talking about has not been able to scale yet. That's the challenge, right? Most of the companies, including ours, so far have not produced more than 100 homes in a year, right? And when you compare that to the Pulte's and the Lennars and the others, that's really, really small.
But that's just a fact of scaling up the technologies and the tools that would go around it. It appears you have the unit economics going for you in such a way that that's going to be an efficient process once the supply chain and those things are put in place. Or do you think there's other barriers that will prevent scalability?
Well, some of the challenges we're running into, you're absolutely right, how the challenge is that each municipality, each county may have a different building code, may have different requirements. We're seeing so much innovation out there in the market, not only us, but many others that are either suppliers or competitors who are working on technologies. SIP is an example, structurally insulated panels, how to make them super efficient, chemical free, and inexpensive. So, where as these competing technologies kind of come through the pipeline and there's some clear winners as far as efficiency and scale, I think we will see the bigger players in the market start to take notice, go, okay, because it's this, we call it the challenge of the craftsman style home. Because no offense to mobile home manufacturers, that's one type of product, and that's not what we're talking about here, right? It's a HUD home. It's built with glue and staples. It's not very high quality. It's built to last about 10 years. Okay. There's some in the industry who probably argue with me, but that's pretty much what we see. Whereas what we see the market demanding is okay, I don't want to pay for a luxury custom build. I want a small, high quality, craftsman level finish out product. And how do we deliver that to the market? And it's very exciting because there's so many of us in this space driving this.
But you mentioned building codes and cities having different requirements and so forth. What's the challenge there with tiny homes? Are cities ready for tiny homes? Are they expecting it? And do you think they'll foster it?
Well, there's two challenges from the way I see it. One is many cities have minimum square footage requirements. Now we see some of that changing. I'll give you an example. Here, an Austin suburb called Leander, Texas, has went a year ago, last April, changed their building code to allow tiny homes. Now, there's still requirements, but they've dropped their square footage requirement down to, I believe, like 170 square feet. So that's paved the way for that to go through. The other side of it is the certification or the building standard. Now, we're building to two standards, one for houses on wheels, which are used for short-term rental applications. That's the ANSI standard, American National Standards Institute, and then the IRC code for modular. And each state has its own modular requirements. In Texas, that's dictated by Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation. We have to meet their requirements to be certified to deliver, not just manufacture in the state, but actually deliver a product into the state. So that too is evolving. We see them as a partner and work with them as they look at these new technologies and kind of bring everybody to the table. But again, it doesn't happen fast.
Well, on the investing front, we're seeing a lot of interest in tiny homes. It appears the profitability is there, the returns are there. And why is that?
Well, there's quite a bit of market demand. I would say my judgment, knowing the numbers that I do, is the manufacturing margins are good when the efficiencies are reached with volume. The reason developers are stepping up to the table is they're seeing a way to increase their margins. So For example, if you've got like an organic farm in Elgin, Texas, and you want to build an agrarian community, and you go to the city and you get your permitting, you put in a PUD, a public utility district, but you're like, well, I can stick build these for a site build, actually, stick build on site these units for X dollars a square foot. But I could bring in a quote unquote tiny home product between 600 and 1200 square feet that's modular, high quality, and I can get units on the ground faster. That means it's sold and closed faster, revenue in quicker. And when you look at the marketing side of it, people are fascinated with this, right? You bring in this modular model and show all the latest features and functionality, it drives interest and demand. And it also pulls people away from the traditional, oh, well, there's a tract home development over here. And yeah, they're making these houses, and they all look like all the other houses. So there's some uniqueness to it and some newness as well.
But it sounds like the owners or the developers can then create unique communities instead of just another square box where they all look the same. I could build an agrarian community here. I could build a makers group over here. I could build whatever else. It seems to be a move to bring people back close to where they live and where they work is not too far apart. Makes no sense to live on one side of the city and work on the other side of the city because we all spend half a day just traveling back and forth. And so there's a move to get closer to your work. And with these tiny homes, you could start to build communities that would achieve that. Do you think that's realistic?
Somewhat. And let me explain that. So the challenge is in a big part of my adult experiences, I've lived in Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, and Austin. So I've hit all the big four. And as we know, land in the city is expensive and not readily available. What we're starting to see is, and what I talk to a lot of these neighboring communities about, is growth in what I call the exurbs. Here in the Austin area, that would be towns like Bastrop, Lockhart, Manor, Hutto, Elgin, Taylor, and particularly to the east because land prices are not that expensive, and a lot of these cities are on transportation corridors. There's demand for workforce housing in those communities for people that would like to live and work there, but maybe even being displaced even further afield. So there's several different business models here. Many of these cities are interested in working with their economic development corporations, interested in public partnerships. We're exploring many of those things. And like you said, whether it's an agrarian community or an active adult community or workforce housing, I get many calls from school districts just to say, oh my gosh, we had 130 teachers who couldn't live in the city because it just wasn't available housing. Can you do anything about that? So, well, let's sit down with the city and see what we could do about that. But yes,
So you touched on the next major point, which is affordable housing. This is an opportunity to bring affordable housing in a bigger way where it seemed like it was tough to do in the past because it was so expensive. We get the cost down, now we can do more of it and we solve that problem. How much do you think tiny homes will solve the affordable housing issue?
well, again, I struggle with the word tiny house, but this small house, I think we'll continue to see the cost of the units go down. At our annual conference every year, we bring the best and brightest together from around the world. And in fact, this year it's going to be here in Austin in August. I'm not sure why they chose August, but we continue to see improvements in technology and cost and supply chain management in this area. The costs go down. And having mechanisms in place now to do secondary mortgages, not amortize the cost of the land, I think this will truly grow into a new way of providing housing to what, again, we call the missing middle market,
Well, great. In the last minute or two we have here, what else should we cover about this subject that we haven't?
I think let's talk a little bit about what business models we're seeing developers use out in the marketplace. It might be interesting to your listeners.
Absolutely.
So, we see what we call the tiny home hotel model, where someone may want to, they've got a piece of land by a river or lake, and they want to put in 5, 10, 15, up to 20 tiny homes and rent them out on Airbnb or short term rental or some other site. We also see breweries, wineries, distilleries, and organic farms that want to do farm to table meals, want to do wedding venues, want to do provide housing for their like wine club members at a winery, right? And so they're looking at putting tiny houses on wheels, what we call a THOW, THOW, tiny house on wheel. So that is one model. We do see more resort like developments with up to 100 homes. That those are more rare. Then we see these tiny home villages like the one sprouting up in South Austin called Constellation ATX, where they're doing 99-year leasehold estates. You have real property, you amortize the cost of the house. When you're done with it, you can sell it. You call up your realtor, they list it, and it goes for market rate. Those are modular, they're not on wheels. And then you have these tiny house communities where you do have an HOA, but you have a fee simple title to the lot. You buy the lot and either the modular or prefab home. And then the last one, which is we have not done one yet, but we would love to, is the public private partnerships with a municipality and an economic development corporation to really address workforce housing challenges. So just wanted to share that with you. Those are the business models we're seeing out there today.
Well, we appreciate going through that and want to thank you for your time coming out today and sharing us this new business model that's taking over the world, it seems like. But how best for the audience to get back in touch with you?
My email at Sprout is Jeffrey, and it's spelled Jefre .outlaw OUTLAW at sprouttinyhomes.com. And there's a T in Sprout and there's a T in Tiny. Or they could also send a message to info at Sprout Tiny Homes or go to our website, sprouttinyhomes.com.
Well, great. Well, we'll put that in the show notes so people can see that on the screen when they listen to the podcast. And thank you for taking time to share this with us and hope to have you back in the future to give us an update on how that's going.
Great. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and your listeners.
Investor Connect helps investors interested in startup funding. In this podcast series, experienced investors share their experience and advice. You can learn more at investorconnect.org. Paul T. Martin is the director of Investor Connect, which is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the education of investors for early stage funding. All opinions expressed by Hall and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of Investor Connect. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.